The clatter of pans being scrubbed and stacked, the hiss of the gas jets being extinguished one by one, the weary sigh of the dishwasher shutting down. These were the closing notes of the symphony that was a busy restaurant kitchen. For most, it signaled the end of a long shift, a release into the cool night air. But for Marcus, a line cook whose movements were as economical as his words, it was often an interlude before a different kind of service began. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe quiet genius always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more. He moved with a practiced grace through the now dim kitchen, the stainless steel surfaces gleaming faintly under the single safety light. His official work was done, the meticulously plated dishes sent out, the orders barked and fulfilled. Yet, he lingered. This was his own time, a quiet ritual born of a compassion that ran deeper than any stockpot. He was a man whose life had been a slow simmer of hardship, seasoned with resilience, and it had taught him flavors of empathy that few culinary schools could impart. His current existence was one of long hours for pay that barely stretched, a near-invisible cog in the bustling machine of the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that prided itself on its exclusivity. His strength, the profound kindness that defined him, was as hidden as the finest herbs in a complex sauce, often overlooked by those who only saw a pair of hands working the line. He remembered his grandmother, her kitchen a haven of warmth and generosity, where no one was ever turned away hungry. That memory was the pilot light for his own quiet mission. But what happened next would change everything. Marcus Holloway was a man carved from the oak of quiet dignity. His past was a tapestry woven with deferred dreams and the steady rhythm of labor. He'd once harbored ambitions of culinary artistry, of crafting menus that told stories, but life, with its relentless pragmatism, had steered him towards the more immediate need of a steady paycheck. He found himself a line cook, a crucial but often uncelebrated player in the nightly drama of fine dining. His hands, calloused and quick, knew the language of fire and steel, of transforming raw ingredients into fleeting moments of pleasure for others. His emotional state was a carefully guarded landscape. Years of being overlooked had taught him the art of observation, of listening more than he spoke. He'd endured the subtle slights, the casual dismissals, the weight of being judged by his apron rather than his character. What defined him was not bitterness, but a profound understanding of hunger, not just for food, but for recognition, for a sliver of warmth in a cold world. His closest confidants in this silent ministry were the shadows that gathered in the alley behind the Gilded Spoon. They were the city's forgotten, the homeless men and women whose faces were etched with stories Marcus never pried into. He knew a few by the nods they exchanged. There was Sarah, whose voice was a raspy whisper but whose eyes held a surprising sparkle when she spoke of her long-lost cat. And Pops, an older man, his back bent like a weathered tree, who sometimes offered cryptic but kind words that resonated with an old wisdom. These individuals weren't just recipients of his charity, they were a silent congregation to whom he offered his edible sermons of care. He never preached, never judged. He simply cooked. The opposing force in Marcus's world wasn't a singular villain, but the pervasive indifference of a system that allowed such quiet desperation to exist in the shadows of opulence. It was the averted gazes on the street, the bureaucratic chill of shelters, the constant, gnawing pressure of scarcity. More directly, there was Mr. Henderson, the restaurant manager, a man whose primary concern was the bottom line. Henderson wasn't malicious, merely preoccupied with margins. He'd occasionally make pointed remarks about food waste, his eyes scanning the inventory sheets with a hawk-like intensity. Every scrap costs, Marcus, every single scrap, he'd say, unaware that the scraps Marcus meticulously saved were destined for a higher purpose than the compost bin. Marcus would simply nod, his face unreadable, absorbing the implied scrutiny without a word of his true stewardship. The alley was Marcus's sanctuary and his stage. By day, it was a grimy service entrance, smelling of bleach and discarded vegetable trimmings. By night, under the lone, flickering bulb above the steel door, it transformed. The cacophony of the city softened to a distant hum, and the dominant aroma became whatever magic Marcus was coaxing from the day's surplus, a hearty stew from leftover braised short ribs, a surprisingly delicate soup from vegetable peelings and a carefully hoarded chicken carcass, or even simple grilled sandwiches, elevated by a touch of herb butter he'd made from parsley stems. His cooking, even with these humble ingredients, possessed a depth, a soulfulness, that spoke of his hidden talent. It was a quiet testament to the idea that care was the most vital ingredient, a hint that the man in the stained apron held a potential far richer than his station suggested. One particular Tuesday, as the last of the city's bustle ebbed away and the familiar quiet settled over the alley, the rhythm of Marcus's routine was unexpectedly altered. He was just ladling a fragrant lentil and vegetable soup into a sturdy container when the heavy back door creaked open, not with the usual tentative push of one of his regulars, but with a more confident, deliberate movement. A man stood there, silhouetted against the dim kitchen light. He was well-dressed, his suit impeccably tailored, his shoes gleaming even in the poor light. He carried an air of quiet authority, his gaze direct but not unkind. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm and modulated. "I was told there might be something to eat back here. For a few guests." Marcus paused, ladle midair. This was new. His usual patrons were familiar faces, their needs unspoken but understood. This man, with his expensive clothes and polite inquiry, was an anomaly. Yet, Marcus's ingrained hospitality, the core of his nightly ritual, didn't waver. It was a habit, an extension of his being. He simply nodded. "There's always something," he replied, his voice low and steady. "Enough for a few more, yes." He didn't ask questions, didn't show surprise. It was as if a different kind of hunger, just as valid, had presented itself at his door. The man seemed to study him for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, perhaps appreciation for the lack of fuss, the simple acceptance. Marcus just turned back to his pots, grabbing a few more clean containers, his movements efficient and unhurried. He simply asked, "Hungry?" It was less a question, more an invitation. The man nodded. "Very." Minutes later, a sleek, dark sedan, the kind that whispered of wealth and power, glided silently to the alley's entrance, its polished hood reflecting the solitary bulb. The well-dressed man, whom Marcus would later learn was named Arthur, opened the rear passenger door. Out stepped a family, a man, his face etched with the subtle weariness that often accompanied great responsibility, a woman whose elegance seemed momentarily subdued by the unfamiliar surroundings, and a teenage girl, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. They looked, Marcus thought, strangely humbled, out of place yet not imposing. The aroma of his soup, rich with cumin, coriander, and a hint of smoked paprika, seemed to cut through the cool night air, an unlikely ambassador between two vastly different worlds. Marcus didn't stare. He didn't fawn or offer apologies for the less-than-glamorous setting. He simply ladled the hot soup into the containers Arthur had brought forward, adding a piece of day-old bread he'd toasted with a smear of garlic. He passed the food to Arthur, who then served the family as they stood somewhat awkwardly near their car. The father, Mr. Sterling, took a spoonful, then another. His expression, initially guarded, softened. The mother, Eleanor, followed suit, a small, almost involuntary sigh escaping her lips. The daughter, Olivia, watched Marcus with an intensity that made him feel, for a fleeting moment, truly seen. Conversation was minimal. Marcus returned to his quiet work, cleaning his station, while the family ate in a silence that felt more profound than awkward. He could hear the occasional murmur, the soft clink of a spoon against a container. When they were finished, Arthur collected the empty containers. Mr. Sterling approached Marcus, his hand extended. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that transcended the simple words. That was remarkable. Marcus simply met his gaze and nodded, accepting the handshake. "Glad you enjoyed it." The next day, the encounter felt almost dreamlike. The gilded spoon was its usual whirlwind of heat and pressure. Mr. Henderson, oblivious, breezed through the kitchen, making a sharp comment about the previous night's stock reconciliation. "Inventory was a bit off, Marcus. Keep a closer eye on the prime cuts, eh? Those things don't grow on trees." Marcus merely grunted in affirmative, the billionaire's handshake still a faint impression on his palm. He continued his nightly ritual for the next few days, the memory of the Sterling family adding a new layer to his thoughts. He wondered about them, about the unspoken reasons that had led them to his alley door. Had they been seeking something more than just food? A taste of something real, perhaps, in a life insulated by wealth? He found himself reflecting more on his grandmother's words. "Kindness, son, is a feast everyone can afford to share." Then, late one evening, nearly a week after their first encounter, Arthur reappeared at the kitchen door, alone this time. The alley was empty, the night air crisp. "Marcus," Arthur began, his tone respectful. Mr. Sterling was deeply impressed. Not just by the food, but by you. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron, waiting. He would like to speak with you. Properly. This was the pivot, the moment the unexpected ripple began to form a wave. Arthur explained that the Sterling family, despite their immense fortune, had been feeling a profound sense of disconnection. They were philanthropists, involved in numerous charities, but Mr. Sterling had confessed to Arthur that it often felt transactional, distant. They had been searching, almost unconsciously, for something genuine, a reminder of simple, unadorned human goodness. Someone, a contact in a homeless outreach program Arthur discreetly supported, had mentioned rumors of an alley chef, a line cook who fed the needy with extraordinary care. Intrigued, Arthur had done some quiet observation and then brought the Sterlings, hoping the experience might offer them a different perspective. It had, profoundly. They said your soup warmed more than just their stomachs, Arthur relayed. It touched something, lost. Mr. Sterling, Arthur continued, wanted to make a significant gesture. He envisioned a community kitchen, a place that offered not just food but dignity, modeled on Marcus's quiet philosophy. He wanted Marcus's input, his guidance. He doesn't want to just throw money at a problem, Marcus. He wants to build something with soul. Your soul. The unspoken pressure was immense. This wasn't just an offer of a better job. It was an invitation to step out of the shadows, to translate his quiet compassion into something larger, something that could impact countless lives. The risk was clear. His anonymity, his simple, predictable routine, would be gone. The potential reward, however, was the chance to amplify his kindness on a scale he'd never imagined. He thought of Pops, of Sarah, of all the faces he saw each night. He thought of his grandmother's legacy. He told Arthur he needed a little time. That night, he shared an extra portion of stew with Pops, and in the old man's quiet wisdom, Marcus found a reflection of his own burgeoning resolve. Some seeds, Pops had said, stirring his stew, are meant for bigger fields, son. The meeting was set. Mr. Sterling, true to his desire for authenticity, didn't summon Marcus to a sterile boardroom. Instead, he asked, through Arthur, if he could visit Marcus at the Gilded Spoon after closing, in the kitchen. He wanted Marcus to cook for him again, something simple, there in the place where Marcus performed his nightly acts of service. When the night arrived, the main dining room was dark and silent, but the kitchen hummed with a quiet energy. Marcus, in a clean apron, moved with his usual focused calm. Mr. Sterling sat on a prep stool, watching not like a critic, but like an apprentice. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of potential. Marcus prepared a simple dish, pan-seared chicken with roasted root vegetables, ingredients readily available in the restaurant's larder. He worked with an unshowy precision, his movements economical, his attention absolute. The aroma filled the kitchen, honest and inviting. As they ate, seated at a stainless steel prep table, Sterling finally laid out his vision. He spoke of a foundation, of a dedicated space, properly equipped, staffed. He spoke of wanting to create a new model for compassionate outreach, one that prioritized respect and individual dignity above all else. I have the resources, Marcus, Sterling said, his gaze direct. But you have the understanding, the spirit. I don't want to just fund another soup kitchen. I want to build a place that reflects what you do here, every night, in that alley. A place that truly nourishes. He wasn't offering a handout. He was proposing a partnership. Marcus listened, his expression thoughtful. The scale of it was daunting. Fear, a natural apprehension of such a monumental change, flickered within him. He was a line cook, comfortable in the familiar rhythm of his kitchen, his impact measured one plate at a time. This was something else entirely. But then he thought of the faces in the alley, of the gnawing hunger that went beyond empty stomachs. He thought of the waste he saw, not just of food, but of human potential. Mr. Sterling, Marcus began, his voice quiet but firm, if we do this, it has to be right. It's not just about filling bellies. It's about seeing the person. Will they be treated like people, not problems? Will there be respect in every interaction? Sterling's face lit up. That, Marcus, is precisely why I need you. That ethos is what I want to build this on. Just then, Mr. Henderson, having forgotten his briefcase, walked into the kitchen. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening at the sight of the renowned billionaire casually eating chicken at a prep table, engaged in earnest conversation with his line cook. The manager's jaw tightened, his earlier dismissiveness of Marcus now hanging palpably in the air, utterly discredited by the profound respect Sterling was clearly showing. Marcus, feeling a surge of clarity that pushed past his fear, nodded. Then I'm in. He outlined his conditions. The kitchen should be a welcoming space, not institutional. The food should always be prepared with care, using fresh ingredients where possible. And most importantly, everyone who came for help should be met with the same dignity he tried to offer in the alley. Sterling agreed to every point, his admiration for Marcus's lack of self-interest, his unwavering focus on the mission, visibly growing. The triumph wasn't about personal gain for Marcus. It was the validation of his quiet, persistent kindness. The sacrifice of his anonymity felt small compared to the potential good. A quiet handshake sealed the agreement between Marcus and Sterling, a pact built on mutual respect and a shared vision. As Sterling and Arthur departed, leaving Marcus alone in the silent kitchen, he glanced towards the alley door, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. The immense weight of the decision settled, replaced by a nascent sense of purpose, larger and more defined than before. Plans were swiftly drawn for the Sterling Holloway Community Kitchen, a name Marcus had initially resisted but Sterling insisted upon. It was to be a new kind of space, one built on respect as much as recipes. They didn't just want his culinary skills, they wanted his heart embedded in its very foundation. Marcus was given full oversight of the kitchen's philosophy and daily operations, ensuring that the spirit of his humble alley service would animate this larger endeavor. The Sterling family, too, found a renewed sense of purpose, often volunteering, not for photo opportunities, but for the simple act of connection. The community Marcus had served for so long began to see tangible hope, a place where they were not just fed, but valued. Weeks later, the new kitchen, bright, clean, and welcoming, was operational. It was larger, better equipped, but Marcus ensured it retained a sense of humility, of warmth. He was still cooking, still serving, but now with more resources, reaching more people. Pops was there, helping sort donations, his weathered face crinkled in a near-permanent smile. He winked at Marcus. The memory of his grandmother, her lessons on generosity, felt incredibly vivid, her legacy amplified through his work, a quiet force guiding his hands and his heart. As he handed a steaming plate of stew to a young woman, her eyes weary but grateful, Marcus met her gaze. The aroma was rich, comforting. "Plenty more where that came from," he said, his voice calm and kind. A simple, dignified statement of continued service, a promise kept. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.